How are you guys all doing today? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiegue, live today on May the 29th to talk some more NFL with you guys. Some more stories I have in line for you guys here today. We're going to start off with some more wide receiver group rankings, this time in the NFC East. Then we're going to move it along to some rumors around the NFLPA reportedly getting together an informal proposal to send to the NFL to change the structure of the offseason around OTAs, around training camp, and the scheduling around that. That is yet to come. And also later on in the show, we're going to talk about also more international game locations and possible spots the NFL could be looking at to host a regular season game in the near future. So stick around and find out more on those stories. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. And before I start on the rankings, a reminder, as always, if you have any questions or comments, use the tip and donations link you see on your screen, GSMCPodcast.net. By using this, I can see your question pop up in my chat box, and that way I'll read it on air and get your guys' perspectives on anything I say or on any of the topics at hand. It's a massive help for this show, so if you could, please use the tip and donations link, GSMCPodcast.net. But that allows me to move now into the rankings, this time focusing in on the NFC East. Yesterday we did the NFC North, and now we'll keep going down the line here and talk about the Cowboys, the Commanders, the Giants, and the Eagles, and how they're looking at the wide receiver position. 4 through 1, again, as always, and there could be some surprises in here. This was a pretty interesting one to rank, but without further ado, I will move into the first one, that being number 4, the Washington Commanders. Just really came down to not a lot of reliable, proven options for the Commanders. You have Terry McLaurin, who I think is a very good number 1 receiver, very underrated and not talked about enough because of the situation there with the Commanders. They've never really had a solid quarterback, but in saying that, he still has put up some pretty decent numbers, and I think now with Jayden Daniels, this could possibly be the best quarterback he's ever had, just based on the ceiling that Jayden Daniels could reach. The other one could have been Kirk Cousins, but I think Jayden Daniels has that big, how much more of a higher ceiling than Kirk. So big things to come from Terry. But then you look at all the other options besides him. You have Jahan Dotson, who was a rookie last year. So you could sort of give him a pass for not, wowing everybody. Not everybody can be a Justin Jefferson or a Jamar Chase coming out of college in their first year. But I thought he did pretty solid. I think he could be a good number 2 for them. But then you see on your screen I have Luke McCaffrey there. They just drafted him, and that's because of the lack of options that really the Commanders have. The only one with the reputation, really, just to touch base on that again, is Terry McLaurin. Jahan Dotson really hasn't done enough, and you have Amador Zaccheaus there also as some more depth at that position, but not really too much to work with here for the Washington Commanders. I'm still a little surprised they haven't addressed it a little bit more in the offseason. It seems like they've addressed everything else but the wide receiver position, so either they don't think any of the candidates fit, or they might like the group that they have right now. Some good reviews from Luke McCaffrey, but to expect what you'd want out of a number 3, potentially number 2 receiver in his first year, that's kind of hard for me to really buy into. So the Commanders will be the worst ranked wide receiver group just because of the lack of options there. Could be talented, but we just don't know yet. They are still very young, other than Terry McLaurin. But the first surprise of the list at number 3, the Dallas Cowboys. The Dallas Cowboys have the 3rd best wide receiver group, receiving group, I should say, not technically just wide receiver group in the NFC East. Why the Dallas Cowboys? Well, too many question marks. Too many question marks for me. Ceedee Lamb, contract negotiations. Is he going to be there? Is he not going to be there? I know he's most likely going to be there. He said he was probably going to play this season in Dallas, but how those contract negotiations finally play out, that's still to be seen. How they work out and how much time does he have this offseason to really get integrated, that's all going to affect his play during the regular season. I know he's still training, but still, I find it more valuable to be with your team. Of course, he could show up to training camp, but the signs don't point that way for Ceedee Lamb and how very differentiated these two sides are on the contract negotiations. Then you look at Jake Ferguson, a good option at tight end. Oddly enough, he was probably their second best receiving option. Was second on the team in yards behind Ceedee Lamb. Ceedee was the only one to exceed 1,000 yards. Everybody else was around 700 or 600, that sort of range in terms of yards. Not many touchdown scorers either. Ceedee Lamb had the most on that team as well. So a pretty decent fall off once you get past Ceedee Lamb, and he's sort of a question mark right now, I guess, at worst for the Dallas Cowboys. Then, like I mentioned, Jake Ferguson, and then you look at Brandon Cooks, who is slowly just starting to slow down for the Dallas Cowboys and in his career. Last season wasn't that great for him. It wasn't that great for Brandon Cooks. And then you look even past that. If you don't really want to buy in on Brandon Cooks slowing down, well, you have now, who do you look towards after Brandon Cooks? The best candidate for that spot is the guy you see on your screen there at Jalen Tolbert. And he really didn't do too much last year. Not too many people honestly know about him or really have too much confidence in him yet because they haven't really seen him perform or get as many targets as these other guys have. Really, Ceedee, ate up most of those targets. Then came Jake Ferguson. Then Brandon Ayuk was used sporadically, and he was the third option on that team. So you don't really get to see more depth, more options that you have now after Brandon Cooks and Ceedee Lamb. Michael Gallup moves on. He was higher than Jalen Tolbert last year. So now we're really going to see Jalen Tolbert for who he is. So based off of that, you don't really know what to expect. He could be very good, or he could just be average, and the Dallas Cowboys don't really have too many options other than what they did last year to base it off of that. So I don't like all the question marks around this team, the depth issues that they have at this position and at running back and at offensive line. It doesn't really sit well with me. So for that, I only have them at number 3 because they have two solid options, one really great one, a solid one in Jake Ferguson, but then after that, no real reputation for these guys. The versatility that they bring, not too much after Jake Ferguson and Ceedee Lamb, and then also the amount of options that they have just really is limited to 3, maybe 4 guys that they want to go to. So that allows me to move on to the number 2 on my list, the New York Giants. Another surprise just because of how it all plays out, but very similar to the Cowboys, honestly, if you look at it. Based off of last year, they really didn't have a bona fide number 1 receiver, but that's where you get that man in the middle there, Malik Nabers, selected number 6 overall in the draft, and I am a really big fan of him. It's giving those Odell Beckham vibes that were all over New York when he was drafted. Everybody bought into the hype, and he performed out there from his rookie year and throughout the time that he was in New York. I think Malik Nabers can do the exact same thing for the Giants, and I know the biggest question mark is probably Daniel Jones, but he didn't have a very good receiving option that he now potentially has in Malik Nabers last year. I think that makes a world of difference. And apart from Malik Nabers, you have Wan'Dale Robinson, number 17 there on your screen. Then Darius Slayton as well as the big 3 in my opinion. But then you still have options besides that at Bellinger at tight end, Isaiah Hodgins, Allen Robinson, and Jake Stoll. Not the biggest named guys out there, but even still, I think they provide a pretty decent, weaponry there for the Giants to sort of work with there as their receiving group. And also, similar to the Dallas Cowboys, which is probably my biggest point, the Cowboys have one really awesome receiver, right, in Ceedee Lamb. Then after that, they have these options that you're sort of okay on. They're not the worst, but they're certainly not the best. I think it's almost the exact same thing with the Giants, but at this point, I would probably take Darius Slayton, Wan'Dale Robinson, and maybe even Jalen Hyatt instead of Brandon Cooks and Jalen Tolbert at this moment, just because I feel like they have a little bit more to give now. Brandon Cooks is on the other side of his career, and Wan'Dale Robinson, pretty random, but I think I remember seeing Ceedee Lamb sort of mention Wan'Dale Robinson as one of the most underrated receivers he has ever seen, or that came to his mind in one interview. I know it's out there, pretty vague explanation, I do know, but I can almost guarantee that he mentioned Wan'Dale Robinson in there, and I haven't watched too much of the Giants to really verify that, but I know he said it. I know he mentioned his name. So a lot of people are sleeping on Wan'Dale Robinson. Darius Slayton, a solid year for him. Last year they had no receiver. They only had one receiver, Darius Slayton, over 770 yards. Three receivers had at least 500 yards for the Giants. So if you compare that to the Dallas Cowboys, Brandon Cooks, Jake Ferguson, and Jalen Tolbert all had that same amount or worse than those numbers of the New York Giants. This isn't an awful group. I just think the quarterback play sometimes masks that. And if they had, maybe a different option than Daniel Jones, or maybe Daniel Jones plays better this next year, I think these guys could really excel for the New York Giants, which means at the number one spot, obviously the Philadelphia Eagles, a boatload of talent, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, two wide receiver ones on any of these teams probably, other than maybe the Dallas Cowboys. They would have two wide receiver ones just like the Eagles do if Devontae Smith was on the Cowboys alongside Ceedee Lamb. Also, Dallas Goedert, one of the best tight ends probably in the NFC. Definitely one that gets slept on a lot, but he's also up there as a favorite for Jalen Hurts. Then the options besides that get a little iffy. You have Paris Campbell there as well. So they lost Quez Watkins, so that's going to hurt a little bit on the depth chart. They're going to have to figure out who's that next guy to step up. But those three guys there on your screen are all really in the primes of their careers. I think Dallas Goedert might be the oldest one at around 29, 28 years old. But then A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith are 26 and 25 years old. Both of them could pretty much do everything. They've already established their reputation as some of the best receivers in the NFL. And none of these guys have more than maybe four or three really good options. The Giants have probably three to five options, but I think these three are the best out of the NFC, and they provide you the most reliable pass catching options and the most reliable pass catching group in the entire NFC. They're stacked on the offensive side of the ball. Now they just have to go out there and execute. Really no excuse not to with the kind of players that they have, but that's pretty much my list. The Philadelphia Eagles rounded off at number one, and as always, I would love to know what you guys think of it. Let me know what your guys' thoughts are on the order of it, the Giants and the Cowboys, where they fell, and leave it in the live chat box or in the comments section afterwards. But in saying that, we will move on with the rest of the show. And when we come back, I mentioned before, we're going to talk about the NFLPA reportedly getting together a proposal to try and change up the offseason this coming year, potentially in 2025. I'll let you know what those changes are and what it could mean for the NFL in just a few seconds. Don't go anywhere.